For me, it's kind of like a compulsion. Like if I don't make stuff, I get really unhappy. I feel like I like have to. And I've had periods of time where I don't want to make anything, or maybe I'm feeling burned out on music and just like I don't want to be a musician anymore, and I can't not do it.
I figured out at a pretty young age that when I make something and people are like, "Oh, that's cool that you made that," that it makes me happy. And so a lot of it comes from just like wanting to find my role in society. You know, like I want to contribute and I want people around me to appreciate me for my contribution. And so even if it's just something that is like, hey, I made a thing that's cool to look at or fun to listen to, that gives me a sense of purpose.
For me, it obviously changes, like throughout your life, your reasons for doing anything are different. And the first record definitely felt like wanting to be a part of something. I saw this like music scene and was like, wow, this is so cool, community, like everybody's seeking like community. And so that felt like a way, like an entry point into this like community. And then, you like make a record and then all of a sudden you're like a musician, you just kind of have to do it again. And so then it became like there's kind of like outside pressures being like, make another one. And the idea was kind of just to make one at the beginning, but then it just like the whole context changes and the reasons become like so much more complex than just making something for the sake of it. This is like our job, it's our passion, there's a lot to it, and so the reasons are like really multifaceted, and so it affects like the way that the kind of music you even make. You start thinking about the audience and you start thinking about like the catalog of the band, and like there's so many factors at play. And as you get older, and like sometimes you can like reject all those pressures, and sometimes you really feel them. It just totally depends on the moment. It's like really difficult to try to figure out like why we make, why you sit down and make something. It's just like human nature or something.
Well, for all of us too, and this is not like unique to me, but I was like so obsessed with music when I was a kid. It was like really like all I thought about. Even like in school, I would just be sitting there thinking about music. And like the better that we get and the more like proper of a band we become, and I look out and I see like other kids like having that experience with our music that I had with bands when I was younger, is like totally insane to me, and really surreal. And it becomes like kind of like what Andrew was talking about, like what's your role in society, and like not to be cheesy, but it does have like an element of like purpose or whatever, and not a lot of people have that in their life. So yeah. Well, I think at the time the playlist at that exact time, we had a playlist going that was like inspiration for the new album, and some of those things wound up kind of as like vague inspirations, but not really direct. There was a lot of like krautrock and sludge metal and like experimental shit. What were we listening to?
It changed, over the course of making the record. It had so many different iterations. So we're listening to like really sludgy, like doom songwriter types, or like, I was listening to a lot of electronic music. The conclusion that we reached over the course of talking about other bands was like, maybe that's not the direction for this record, is to reference other bands, and we tried to kind of like chase something more like ephemeral, like of what is our band. We had a lot of fun and a lot of like success, like looking at other music and like dissecting it and referencing it really heavily, which is really fun. It's fun to be like a student of music, like on your own, and like talk about, listen to a record with your friends and figure out like why it makes you feel a certain way or how they do it. It's really cool. It feels like archaeology or something. But then on this one, like that kind of proved to be a bit of a dead end, and we hit a lot of dead ends, and that was maybe one.
Yeah.
I don't know, sometimes it would be like we would be talking and having a conversation where we'd be like both in agreement with each other but saying completely different things, and like somehow both things would be true.
I think the new album is like, there's like a feeling in the album, and the feeling changes by song, but generally speaking there's like some sort of like vibe. A feeling, you can never really like pin it down to like its essential properties or whatever. And so we have different ways of like articulating what that feeling is, but ultimately we'll never be like exactly on the same page. And so this album feels like a combination of our understanding of what Dive like feels like. Whereas like Deceiver, there was much more of like a paradigm or like a format for what the album sounded like. Same thing with Ocean. Same thing with Izzy Azar a little bit, although that one was like also very feeling. It's hard to like explain what the discussions are like, because sometimes it'll feel like we talk about a lot and we talk about nothing at the same time.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's like really specific, like this type of guitar playing or these types of tempos or like a certain minimalism or whatever, and then sometimes, yeah, it's just fully esoteric, like feels gray and purple or something like that.
We talk about music so much, and we've shared so much music and with each other, and so we can like really shorthand a lot of ideas just like by referencing an artist, and we kind of have an understanding of what that is, and like our shorthand like continues to evolve, so like the discussions are like really kind of like esoteric and would probably make no sense to anybody who isn't like in our circle, you know.
I don't think any four of us are really like synesthetic in that way with colors. I feel like we think more about like texture than color. We think about how the sounds feel and how the song feels texturally. At least I'm speaking for myself, but I think we rarely are like, this song sounds too blue or something like that. Even though like the records do have kind of, you know, Ocean did sound blue to me and still does, blue-green. Izzy Azar actually is the gray record in my mind. And this one is red and, I don't even know, red and white. Yeah, black, white, and red.
Izzy Azar is red for me.
Oh, really?
Pink for me.
Pink. Oh yeah, pink
Yeah,
makes
it's a
sense.
reddish pink.
See, we all see it differently.
When we were designing our own light show for the Deceiver tours, we talked about like, all right, what color is this song? And then we realized that none of us agree. You know, like,
The only one we agreed on was not green.
Right. Yeah. Maybe we'll make our green record next.
Yeah, frog.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only thing that helped us was just the actual necessity of like kind of moving on with our lives and like creating a deadline and actually sticking to it, because then it started to, you know, booking tours and stuff like that, you have to do it ahead of time, so that we went all the way to the edge of like not being able to take any more time. So that was kind of the only thing. And then as far as the thing that slowed us down, I mean, I think maybe like perfectionism and just wanting it to be really good, wanting it to be interesting, wanting there to be a lot of different ideas and trying to fit everyone's voice in there. I mean, we went through different phases, like you were saying with what we were listening to, you know, all of that changes. So at the beginning of the process, we might really like a sound, and then kind of midway through, we might want to abandon that.
Yeah, perfection was kind of like the enemy a lot of times. It makes like making the decision really hard, and it makes you never want to like give up on something. But in some, you know, yeah, sometimes it was the enemy, and sometimes it was like this thing that really pushed us to like bring our best and really want to like impress each other and move forward as a band. It's like an interesting concept to think about, because it is like central to that idea, that thing that we were chasing is like central to the record, but also it was like our downfall a lot of times. You know, we had the album done, but we didn't have a you know, like Colin said, we made it outside of the like record label system. We self-financed it and did made it on our own. So when the record was finished, we still didn't have a record label. So we kind of had this idea of like leaking our own song, and then it opened up a lot of possibilities for like how to do that, you know? And so it just felt like thematically aligned with the song to make this like really paranoid kind of like Web 1.0 experience, because the song is kind of about you know, a character like losing themselves and finding themselves on the internet. I feel like one cool thing about this album is it opens a lot of doors thematically, so like it lets us, there's so much more like material to work with, so it makes, you know, making like other assets tied into the record like way easier, because they can all kind of point towards this like bigger picture and kind of like either complicate it or like add to it, which we've never had either. A lot of the other records were kind of like had like tunnel vision in terms of like focus, subject matter, and this one's much more large.
We kind of took a look at post-internet art when we were sort of conceptualizing everything. And one thing that intrigued me a lot was how post-internet art projects happened and failed to achieve any sort of like societal change that they were intending to change, you know? And so like Occupy Wall Street comes to mind as one where it was something that came from the internet to the real world and then didn't work, you know? And so now 10, 15 years after that, how do we do post-internet art in the same way that doesn't fail? And in thinking about it, realized that it's not necessarily that Occupy Wall Street was a failure as much as it was just like a step in a direction. And so what we're trying to do is just add on to the pile of raising awareness to the fact that if we keep going down this road, it's not going to be good for anyone. And thinking of it less as like, we're going to make a record with like an art rollout that's going to start the revolution. You know, like, it's more just like, all right, here's another little baby step. Who else got something, you know? And then hopefully, as the internet dies, what's actually good about it can get back to the real world. You know what I mean?
Nice. Yeah, I like that.
Probably take Miles Davis Kind of Blue, because that's one that I can always just throw on and like listen to, but it's also really hard to memorize. You know, I've got So What memorized, you know, I can sing along every note, even the Coltrane parts, but that took me like 10 years, you know? And so like I feel like if I had to just spend a lot of time on a desert island listening to something, that would be it, because it would take me my whole lifetime to memorize it.
I keep just trying to think of something really long, because I feel like I would like cheat the system, you know? I would have like an 8-hour long record. So Max Richter's Sleep or Music for the Well-Tuned Piano by Lamont Young. But those are both like very kind of like ambient, like the same thing for 8 hours, so I would probably drive myself insane. So I probably had a bad picks.
I feel like I'm always tempted to pick like a perfect album, like Heaven or Las Vegas or something like that, where it's just like I can just put it on and just like, that's the album title, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cocteau Twins. That would have been embarrassing. If I could just put it on and it's just, it's like the whole thing is great and it feels good to listen to. Oh yeah, shit, sorry. But I actually think like the weird subtext of that question is like, are you on the island alone? And even if you're with people, like you're still on an island forever. And I think because of that, I would pick something like The Pavilion of Dreams by Harold Budd, which is like a weird like orchestral ambient record kind of. And it's really like haunting and lonely and meditative. And I feel like I would actually want to listen to that for eternity. Mm-hmm. And it would take me to new places, and I wouldn't just like, you know.
If you were alone?
Yeah, if I was alone, but even with a small amount of people, it's like it's a lonely experience, you know?
True.
The rest of the world is gone. It's just your island.
Mm-hmm. I feel like mine, it's like the opposite. You know, you guys want like the meditative. I'd bring like Drux, like an Aphex Twin record, something like that. because I just feel like it has the most information condensed into an album possible, and it would just, I just wouldn't want to get bored.
You're like decoding it.
Yeah.
So, story number 1 is when we had to cross the border of Mexico carrying all our gear on foot over the footbridge that's very long because the promoter got too drunk the night before and couldn't drive us.
And our van wasn't registered.
Yeah, and, oh right, yeah, in our van we couldn't drive it across the border ourselves. So that's story number 1. And story number 2, can't really say a whole lot about because we signed an NDA, but a lot of the financing from this last record came from we performed at a special event, let's say, for a very well-known billionaire.
At, what was that venue called? Like Bohemian Grove or
Yeah, they
something?
have like a weird, like that owl statue.
Yeah, it was cool. Yeah, I mean, he was really nice.
Yeah, I'll never forget it.
It's like a bunch of really good people and good refreshments and stuff like that. They had, what was that?
Networking opportunities.
Mm-hmm. What was that, like, the drinks they gave us? Like a drink?
I think that's part of the, like Bailey was saying, we're not necessarily.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but man, ooh, boy.
Crazy. Yeah, I feel like 10 years younger. The second one.
Obviously.
She was there when we talked about it.
Yeah, no, we never walked across the footbridge in Mexico carrying our gear.